My company had just awarded me a bonus of $150,000, and my mother-in-law was demanding I give $100,000 of it to my sister-in-law. If I refused, she said, I should get a divorce. Before I could even form a response, my husband added that if we couldn't make it work, then we should just get divorced. My name is Leah, and I'm 33 years old. I'm a project manager for a tech company on the East Coast. To outsiders, my life looked complete. I had a husband named Mark, a condo, a stable career, and the appearance of a respectable life. Only I knew that for 7 years as a daughter-in-law, I had been holding it all together by myself. I held on through clenched teeth, through swallowed tears, and through countless moments of telling myself that this is just what family is. It was a weekend evening, and a cool wind was picking up. I had just received the notification that my project bonus had been deposited into my account. The flashing numbers on the screen made me freeze for a few seconds. 3 years of late nights and early mornings, of skipping meals for meetings, of working through fevers while clutching my laptop, had finally borne fruit. A bonus of nearly $150,000. I didn't feel the kind of joy that makes you shout. I just felt a bone-deep exhaustion, as if I had just swum across a long, wide river. I thought about the heavy interest on our mortgage, about my plan to pay down the principal to ease the burden, about my mother back home whose back had been aching lately. I wanted to buy her a better mattress. I thought of 100 different things, and in all those thoughts, the idea of just giving the money away never once appeared. I set the table for dinner. It was a typical meal: a green salad, baked salmon, and a side of roasted potatoes. My mother-in-law sat at the head of the table, pouring water and serving herself with a practiced ease. Mark's sister, Megan, sat next to her, her lips painted red as her thumb scrolled through her phone. She would occasionally look up and smile, a knowing little smirk on her face. The moment I sat down, my mother-in-law placed her fork on the plate, her voice as casual as if she were discussing the weather. "Leah," she said, "let me be direct. You need to give Megan $100,000 from that bonus you just received. If you don't, you can get a divorce." I thought I had misheard. The word divorce landed on the dinner table like a shattered plate. I was holding a spoon, and my hand went rigid. The steam rising from the food seemed to cloud my vision. I looked at my husband, Mark, who was eating with his head down, his face unnervingly calm, a placidness that felt cold. I waited for him to look up, for him to ask his mother what she was talking about, for him to brush it off at the very least, to offer me a single word of defense. But he didn't. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean by that, Mom?" "I have plans for that money, to pay down our mortgage." She smirked, her tone still maddeningly even. "The mortgage can be paid off slowly. The condo is in Mark's name, so it will always be yours as a couple. But Megan needs this money urgently. You're her sister-in-law. It's not too much to ask for you to help her out." Megan finally looked up then, her eyes wide and innocent, but her words were laced with sugar. "Leah, I really don't want to be a bother, but I'm about to close on a condo near a great school district. If I miss this chance, I'll lose out later. It's for my future, you know." I felt a knot form in my throat. Megan's future was a valid reason, but our future, my future, was something that could be put off. I spoke slowly, trying to maintain my composure. If Megan wants to buy a home, she can get a loan from the bank or figure it out herself. This money is the result of my hard work. I can't. Before I could finish, Megan shot back, her voice sharp as a thin blade. "You say that, but when you married into our family, we didn't make things difficult for you. When Mark used his savings to help pay for your wedding, did my mom say anything?" I was stunned. The wedding money had been from Mark's own savings. His family hadn't contributed a dime. I was about to say so, but his mother cut me off, tapping her fork lightly on the table. "In this house, we don't distinguish between what's yours and what's mine. Once your family, everyone's money is shared money. When you say it's your money, you're treating his mother and sister like outsiders." I felt the blood rush to my face. For 7 years, I had contributed consistently to household expenses. I had helped pay for renovations. I covered her medical bills when she was sick. I took care of so much around the house. And now, Just because I wouldn't hand over nearly $100,000, I was the one treating them like outsiders. I turned to my husband, my voice losing its firmness. "Mark, say something. You know how hard I worked for this. You know how much I sacrificed for my job." He set down his fork, took a napkin, and wiped his mouth, his movements as slow and deliberate as someone about to make a statement that had nothing to do with him. Then he looked up at me, his gaze direct. "Leah, Mom is right. Megan, buying a home is a big deal. If we can help, we should. Just transfer the money to her. You can use the rest to pay down the mortgage for a few months." My ears were ringing. If we can help, we should. He said it as if $100,000 was a few hundred. As if I could just cut back on a few shopping trips to make up for it. I shot up from my chair, its legs scraping loudly against the tile floor. "How can you say that? That's money I earned. I worked my tail off for 3 years for it, and I didn't ask anyone for a single dollar. Now you're telling me to give the majority of it to someone else, and I can just pay the mortgage for a few months?" His mother stood up too, her voice rising, her eyes sharp as needles. "Someone else? She's your husband's sister. To talk like that is heartless. I've told you already, if you don't give her the money, you can pack your bags and leave this house." I laughed, but tears streamed down my face. I laughed because I realized how foolish I had been. 7 years of trying to be the perfect daughter-in-law, and in the end, I could be kicked out of the house with a single sentence. I looked at Mark one last time, a final glimmer of hope that he would just say, "Mom, let me talk to my wife," that he would pull me back down to my seat, that he would show a shred of loyalty. But he remained silent for a few seconds before uttering a sentence colder than the wind outside. "If you can't live with us, then let's get a divorce." It felt like a slap across the face. My whole body recoiled, and I had to grip the edge of the table to stay upright. I stared at him in disbelief. "What did you just say?" He didn't repeat himself. He turned away like someone ending a business meeting. Before walking into the living room, he called back, his voice still flat. "Think it over. Don't make things more difficult." The living room door closed, leaving the dinner half-eaten. His mother sat back down and continued eating as if nothing had happened. Megan murmured something that was meant to sound sympathetic but was really just adding fuel to the fire. "Just calm down. Mark has a temper. If you just transfer the money, everything will go back to normal." I stood there, feeling completely lost in the very home I had contributed my money, my effort, and my youth to maintain. I walked into our bedroom and closed the door, leaning my back against it. I slid down to the floor, wrapped my arms around my knees, and buried my head. My phone buzzed. A coworker was texting congratulations. "You're amazing, Leah. Biggest bonus in the department." I stared at the words, a lump forming in my throat. What was the point of being amazing, when the very thing I had earned with my own sweat and blood was being ripped away from me with 2 words, "Get divorced"? I opened my banking app. The number, nearly $150,000, glowed on the screen like an ember, and out there, in the kitchen, they were plotting how to take most of it, as if it had belonged to them all along. I wiped my tears, took a deep breath, and opened my contacts. My finger hovered over a name. Leah, my own name. My friend from college who had become a lawyer. I hadn't called her in a long time, always telling myself that family matters should be resolved within the family. But this time, I knew if I stayed silent, they would take my silence as consent. I pressed the call button. "Hello, Leah?" Her voice came through, as sharp and warm as ever. "It's late. What's going on?" I swallowed, my throat dry. If I get a divorce, what do I need to prepare?" The other end of the line went silent for a beat, and then she said she was not joking around and told me to send my location, that she was coming over right away. I hung up and looked around the room. Everything was the same, but my heart had a long, deep crack running through it. I knew, from the moment I called Leah, that my life had turned a corner. It was no longer about who was right or wrong, but about whether I had the courage to save myself. That night, I barely slept. The room was dark, except for the pale yellow stripe of a streetlight filtering through the blinds, casting a faint glow on the ceiling. I lay on my side, my back to the door, listening to every small sound from outside. my mother-in-law's slippers shuffling on the floor, the sound of water running in the sink, and then the living room door opening and closing. Mark didn't come into the bedroom. I knew that silence was heavier than any argument. I closed my eyes, but my mind wouldn't rest. 7 years of marriage replayed like a movie, scene by scene. The day I first moved in, still clumsy and awkward. The first meal I cooked was too salty, and my mother-in-law didn't scold me, but simply put down her fork and said that a girl from the city should learn how to cook properly. I had forced a smile, holding back tears. The day I asked to go on a business trip, she told me that a woman's place was with her family. I nodded again, enduring it again. I had become so accustomed to enduring that I thought it was my duty. Around 1 a.m, my phone vibrated softly. It was a text from Leah, my friend, the lawyer. Just a few words, "I'm here." I shot up in bed, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my chest. I cracked open the bedroom door and peeked out. The lights were still on. My mother-in-law was lying on the sofa, her arm over her forehead, probably in a fitful sleep. I didn't see Mark. I quietly opened the front door. Leah was standing there, her hair tied back neatly, wearing a light jacket. Her face was bare of makeup, but her eyes were incredibly alert. When she saw me, she didn't ask a lot of questions, just looked me straight in the eye. "You okay?" I shook my head, and with just that simple gesture, my throat tightened. Leah stepped inside, took off her shoes quickly but quietly. She glanced around the apartment and then whispered, "Let's talk outside." We went down to the 24-hour coffee shop at the base of our condo building. Only a few tables were occupied. The lighting was soft and yellow, the sound of the espresso machine a gentle hum. I ordered a glass of water, my hand trembling so much I almost spilled it. I told her everything, from beginning to end. Every word my mother-in-law said, every look from Megan, every statement from Mark, even the way he had said divorce as casually as changing a TV channel. Leah didn't interrupt. She just listened, occasionally nodding, stirring her now cold coffee with a small spoon. When I finished, she was silent for a moment, and then asked very slowly, "Whose name is the bonus under? Was it deposited into your personal account or a joint account?" "My personal account." "Do you have any documents proving it's a personal bonus?" "Yes." "The award letter, my employment contract, bank statements." Leah nodded, setting her cup down. "Legally, that's your separate property. No one has the right to force you to transfer it to someone else." I gave a sad smile. "But they're not talking about legality. They're talking about family ties." Leah looked at me, her expression softening, but her voice remained firm. "Family ties don't mean you trade your blood, sweat, and tears for a fake sense of peace. If you give in once, there will be a second time. If you give them the money, you'll lose your voice entirely." I looked down. I knew she was right, but knowing and doing are two different things. My voice trailed off. "If I don't give it to them, and they really file for divorce, what then?" Leah sighed and leaned back in her chair. "Then you face it. But first, you have to protect yourself. I'm telling you straight, from now on, don't transfer a single dollar. Keep all your documents, record conversations, save any text messages. Don't argue, don't get emotional, just let them show their true colors." I looked up. "And Mark?" Leah looked at me for a long time, then spoke deliberately. "Mark has chosen to side with his mother and sister, at least for now. Don't lie to yourself." That statement hurt more than I expected. I turned my head, looking out the glass window. The street was empty, and the few cars that passed left long streaks of light. I felt small, but I also felt something in my chest beginning to harden. It was almost 3 a.m. when we went back up. Leah didn't come inside, just stood at the door and said, "Call me if you need anything. Don't be afraid." I nodded. The door closed, and I stood there for a long moment before going in. My mother-in-law had gone to her room. The house was silent. The next morning, I woke up early. Mark still hadn't returned to our room. I started making breakfast like always, but my heart felt hollow. As I was chopping vegetables, my mother-in-law came out. She looked at me, her eyes filled with suspicion. "Where did you go last night?" "I went out to talk to a friend." "What kind of friend meets so late?" "My best friend." She snorted. If you have something to say it in the house. Don't go airing our family's dirty laundry. I put the knife down and turned to face her, for the first time not avoiding her gaze. I just talked to my friend. I didn't speak ill of anyone. She froze for a second, then her face hardened. Are you starting to talk back to me now? I looked down, my voice steady. I'm not talking back. I'm just telling the truth. Just then, Mark walked in, his shirt wrinkled, his face tired. He looked at me, then at his mother. What's going on? My mother-in-law immediately softened her tone. She's being stubborn. She hasn't thought over what happened yesterday. Mark turned to me. Have you thought about it? I looked at him, studying him closely for the first time in a long while. The man I called my husband felt both familiar and like a stranger. I've thought about it. And? I'm not transferring the money. The air froze. My mother-in-law slammed her hand on the table. What did you say? I took a deep breath. That money is what I earned. I have no obligation to give it to Megan. Megan emerged from her bedroom, having clearly overheard. She crossed her arms and smirked. You're really something, turning the whole house upside down over a little money. I looked straight at her. $100,000 is not a little money. To you, it might be easy come, easy go. But to me, it's my sweat and tears. Mark frowned. Leah, you're being too harsh. I turned to him. Well, try being in my position and see if it doesn't feel harsh. He fell silent. My mother-in-law pointed to the door. If that's what you've decided, then pack your things. This house has no room for a selfish daughter-in-law. My heart clenched, but I didn't cry. I just nodded. Very well. All three of them were stunned. They probably hadn't expected me to agree so quickly. I turned and walked into the bedroom, opening the closet. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. I took out my suitcase and packed my clothes, important documents, and my laptop. I didn't take much, only the essentials. When I dragged my suitcase out, Mark was standing in the doorway. You're really leaving? I looked at him. You're the one who said we should get a divorce. I'm just following through. He bit his lip. I only said that because I was angry. I laughed, a smile so faint that even I found it strange. But I heard it very clearly. I pulled my suitcase past him. My mother-in-law stood with her arms crossed, her face a cold mask. Megan stood behind her, silent. Mark watched me go but didn't try to stop me. The elevator doors closed. As the car descended, my legs felt weak, but my heart felt strangely light. I took out my phone and texted Leah. I'm downstairs. Leah was waiting for me in the lobby. She didn't ask questions, just took the suitcase from my hand. We walked outside into the cool morning air. I glanced back at the building one last time. 7 years. I was leaving behind not just a marriage, but a version of myself that had learned to endure everything. I knew it wouldn't be easy from here on, but at least I had taken the first step out. Leah's car moved slowly through the misty morning streets. I sat in the passenger seat, my hands in my lap, my suitcase in the trunk, silently watching the city begin to stir. The morning rush hour was as chaotic as ever, but to me, everything felt distant, like I had just stepped out of a familiar house only to find myself lost on a crowded street, unsure of where I belonged. Leah didn't turn on the radio. She drove with intense focus, occasionally glancing at me before looking back at the road. I knew she was waiting for me to speak, but I couldn't find the words. My mother-in-law's voice echoed in my head. This house has no room for a selfish daughter-in-law. 7 years of trying to be decent, all summed up in those 2 words. You can stay at my place for now, Leah said softly. It's small, but it's quiet. I nodded. At that moment, just having a place to sleep was a blessing. Leah's apartment on the 12th floor wasn't large, but it was neat. She helped me pull my suitcase into the spare room and handed me a glass of warm water. Drink this. You look pale. I held the glass, the warmth spreading through my palms. I realized then that I hadn't eaten anything substantial since the night before, but I wasn't hungry, just empty. Stay here as long as you need, Leah continued. No one will bother you. We'll figure out the rest later. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking around the room. White walls, gray curtains, nothing more than a bed and a closet. It was simple to the point of being comforting. Thank you, I said quietly. Leah waved her hand. Don't say that. You need to rest right now. She left me alone. When the door closed, I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. My body was exhausted, but my mind was racing. I thought of my parents back home. If they knew, my mother would surely cry. My father would stay silent, light a cigarette, and then say very gently, "You've been through enough, honey." The thought made my eyes sting. My phone vibrated, a text from Mark. "Where are you?" I stared at the screen for a long time before typing a short reply. "At a friend's house." A moment later, another text arrived. "Come home. Mom's just upset for now." I laughed, but tears streamed down my face. Just upset. A demand for $100,000, a threat of divorce, an order to leave the house, all just a temporary fit of anger. I didn't reply. I turned off the screen and placed the phone face down. For the first time in years, I allowed myself not to respond immediately. That evening, Leah called me out for dinner. It was a simple meal: egg drop soup, steamed vegetables, and pan-fried pork, but I was able to eat. I ate slowly, each bite feeling like a remedy for a long spiritual hunger. "Tomorrow," Leah said as she served some vegetables, "you should take a few days off work. Get your head straight. I have too much to do," I replied out of habit. Leah looked at me. "You're facing a divorce, and you're still trying to power through everything?" I fell silent. I knew she was right, but it wasn't easy to break the habit of always having to be strong. That night, I received a call from my mother. Seeing her name on the screen made my heart ache. I took a deep breath and answered, "Hello, honey." My mother's voice was as gentle and slow as always. "Hi, Mom. Why didn't you pick up when I called earlier? Are you very busy?" I swallowed. I didn't want her to worry, but I didn't want to lie. "I'm a little tired. Is something wrong?" she asked immediately. My mother was always like that. She could tell just from my voice. I was silent for a few seconds, then spoke very softly. "Mark and I are having some problems." On the other end of the line, my mother sighed. No blame, no questions, just a long sigh. "Are you at home?" "No, I'm at a friend's." My mother was quiet for another moment, then her voice grew deeper. "Honey, if you can't take it anymore, come home to your father and me. We may not have much, but we won't let you be humiliated." My tears fell. I bit my lip to keep from sobbing aloud. "Okay. Money can be dealt with later," she continued. "The important thing is that you can stand on your own 2 feet." After the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. I felt as if I had lost one pillar of support but found another, one that was stronger and quieter. 2 days later, Mark found me. He called from the lobby of Leah's building. Leah looked at me, a question in her eyes. I nodded. I had to face him eventually. We sat in the coffee shop across the street. Mark looked thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes, his shirt unironed. "Are you okay?" he asked, stirring his coffee without looking at me. "Mom hasn't been eating for days." I gave a faint, bitter smile. "I haven't been eating either." He looked up at me then. "Leah, I'm sorry about what happened, but you have to understand my side. Mom only has Megan." I looked him straight in the eye, my voice very calm. "And what about me?" He fell silent. I continued, each word distinct. "I am your wife, but when I needed you to stand up for me, you didn't. You chose silence." Silence, at that moment, was a choice. Mark clenched his fists. "I didn't want to make a big scene, but you were willing to say we should get a divorce." He looked down and, after a moment, said, "I thought you would just put up with it, like always." The words were spoken softly, but they felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I nodded, a sad smile on my face. "You're right. I've put up with so much that you've gotten used to it." The air between us was heavy. "Finally," Mark said, "I don't want a divorce." I looked at him, a long, hard look, and then spoke, my voice neither high nor low. "I didn't want one either, but now I need a husband who will stand with me. If you can't do that, what's the point of keeping me?" Mark didn't answer. He stood up and said quietly, "I'll think about it." After he left, I remained, staring at the cold cup of water. I knew that from this moment on, I was no longer the one waiting for an answer. I had become the one who would choose. That evening, Leah asked me how it went. "I'm going to prepare for a divorce," I told her. Leah nodded. "Okay, I'll help you with the rest." I looked out at the balcony. The city lights were coming on, one window at a time. I didn't know how long the road ahead would be, but at least I was no longer standing still in the dark. I submitted a request for 3 days of leave. For the first time in years, I wrote a single line for the reason: family matters. My hand didn't tremble, and my mind wasn't as blank as I had imagined. Everything happened slowly but with clarity. Perhaps when a person reaches the absolute limit of their endurance, the decisions that follow become strangely calm. That morning, Leah took me to a notary's office near her place. I brought a folder of documents, copies of my ID, our marriage certificate, my employment contract, the bonus award letter, and my bank statements. Each paper sat neatly in its plastic sleeve, cold and impersonal. Looking at them, I realized that a marriage could also be measured in paperwork. "This is just the first step," Leah said as we waited. "We're not filing yet, but you need to be prepared." I nodded. I no longer felt the fear I had the first night I dragged my suitcase out of the house. In its place was a quieter emotion, like someone accepting a long rain, no longer trying to avoid it, just opening an umbrella and walking on. That afternoon, Mark called again. I hesitated for a few seconds before answering. "I'm at home," he said. "Can you come back and talk to Mom for a bit?" I closed my eyes, the scene from that dinner flashing in my mind, so clear I could hear the sound of the fork hitting the plate. "Talk about what?" "Mom is just worried about Megan." I let out a soft laugh. "And what about you?" He was silent. That silence, lasting only a few seconds, was enough to confirm everything. "I'm not coming back," I said. "If there's something to say, we can say it outside." Mark sighed. "Leah, don't make things more tense." "I'm not the one making things tense," I replied, my voice even. "I'm just no longer willing to be the only one trying to smooth things over." I hung up. Leah looked at me without asking. She understood. That evening, my mother-in-law called. Seeing her number on the screen made my hand pause. I thought for a moment, then answered. "Hello. You're really something," her voice came through, no preamble necessary. "Daring to leave home. Daring to disobey your mother-in-law." "I didn't leave," I said slowly. "I'm just staying out temporarily." "Temporarily?" she scoffed. "You think this is some kind of joke?" I took a deep breath. "Why did you call me, Mom? Come home so we can talk this out properly. If it's just about me giving the money." "I've already told you. I'm not giving it." Her voice shot up. "To live like this is disrespectful. Money is just an object. Family is what's important." I was quiet for a moment, then said something I had never dared to say before. "If family is a place that forces me to sacrifice everything without being respected, then I'm sorry. I can't carry that burden." On the other end, she was stunned. I could hear her sharp intake of breath. "How dare you say that?" she hissed. "I misjudged you from the beginning." I didn't argue. I just said, "Mom, you should get some rest." "I'm hanging up now." I put the phone down, my heart pounding, but it didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. Perhaps because I knew that sooner or later I had to say it. That night, I dreamt of my father. He was sitting on the porch, mending an old bamboo chair. I called out to him, and he looked up with a gentle smile. I woke up to a tear-soaked pillow. The next morning, I went home to my parents. The bus ride took over 2 hours. I sat by the window, watching the rice fields recede. It had been a long time since I felt like I was truly going home. My mother was waiting at the gate. When she saw me get off, she didn't ask any questions, just pulled me into her arms. Her embrace made me burst into tears, crying as if I hadn't been allowed to cry for years. "You're home, so just rest, son," Mom said. "No one here will pressure you." My father, sitting inside, saw me and stood up. He didn't say much, just placed a hand on my shoulder and patted it gently. That one pat was enough to make me feel I was no longer lost. That evening's dinner was simple: crab soup, pickled eggplant, and water spinach. I ate with a good appetite. My mother placed a piece of fish in my bowl, saying I had gotten thinner. I smiled. For the first time in days, my smile wasn't forced. That night, I told my parents everything, holding nothing back. My mother listened, tears falling without her realizing. My father was silent for a long time, then said, "You weren't wrong, but you have to be prepared. Divorce is never easy." "I know," I replied. "But I'm not going back." My mother took my hand. "I'm just afraid you'll suffer." "I've already suffered," I said softly. "Now, I'm just choosing a way to suffer less." The 2 days at home passed quickly. I slept deeply, ate well, and woke up early to water the garden with my mother. These small acts calmed me more than any advice could. On the 3rd day, Mark came to find me. He stood outside the gate, wearing a white shirt and carrying a bag of fruit. Seeing him, I wasn't surprised. I had probably expected it. My mother went to open the gate. She looked at him, her expression no longer as friendly as before, but still polite. "Please come in." Mark bowed his head in greeting. "Hello, ma'am. My father came out too." He said nothing, just nodded. We sat facing each other. Mark placed the bag of fruit on the table and said, "I apologize, ma'am. The problems between Leah and me are my fault." My father looked straight at him. "Your fault, or your lack of courage?" Mark lowered his head, unable to answer. My mother spoke up, her voice trembling but clear. "You let my daughter come back to her parents' home under these circumstances. What do you have to say for yourself?" Mark was silent for a long time, then said, "I'm here to ask Leah to come back. My mother will soften up." I looked at him. "What can you promise?" He looked up, a hint of desperation in his eyes. "I'll talk to Mom. We'll put the money issue aside for now." I shook my head. "I don't need it put aside. I need clear boundaries." "What do you want?" he asked. "I want you to stand up and tell your mother clearly that the money is mine, and no one can touch it. And from now on, any decision concerning me must include my voice." Mark hesitated. That hesitation, once again, gave me my answer. My father stood up, his voice low but firm. "You should go. When you can do what my daughter has asked, then you can come back." Mark looked at me, his eyes a mixture of pleading and confusion. I didn't look away, nor did I nod. I just looked at him as one looks at someone who was once very familiar but is no longer on the same path. He stood up, said goodbye to my parents, and left. The gate closed, and I let out a long breath. I knew that gate had also closed a chapter of my life. That night, I texted Leah. "I've made my decision," Leah replied instantly. "Okay, I'll draft the petition tomorrow." I sat on the porch, watching the crescent moon hang in the sky. For the first time, I felt I was no longer standing at a confusing crossroads. The road ahead was still long and difficult, but I knew I was moving forward. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The morning air in the countryside smells different, of damp earth, of drying hay in the backyard, of kitchen smoke mingling with the wind. I sat up, listening to my mother bustling in the kitchen and my father's dry cough on the porch. These sounds, so ordinary I once took them for granted, now felt weighty, like anchors. I went to the kitchen to help my mother start the fire. She looked at me and smiled gently. "You look more alert today." "Yes." She didn't ask more. She never pushed me to talk before I was ready. Perhaps that's why, during all those years of being a daughter-in-law, whenever I felt tired, I would remember her hunched over the stove, remember that warm silence. After breakfast, my father called me over and handed me a stack of old, yellowed papers, the deed to our family's land. "I want you to look at this," Dad said. I froze. "Why are you giving this to me?" "I'm not giving it to you," he said slowly. "I'm showing it to you so you can have peace of mind. This house will always have a place for you. You don't have to go back empty-handed." I clutched the papers, a lump in my throat. I understood my father's intention. He wasn't giving me property, he was giving me a foundation. That afternoon, Leah called, her voice as brisk and efficient as ever. "The unilateral divorce petition is drafted. I'll send you a scanned copy to review this afternoon." I was silent for a few seconds. Okay, just that one word. But I knew, from that moment on, things had reached a point of no return. That evening, I sat in my room and opened Leah's email. The words appeared on the screen. Plaintiff. Leah. Defendant. Mark. Reason for divorce. Irreconcilable differences, inability to continue the marital relationship. I read slowly, very slowly. Some of the legal phrases felt foreign. Others felt like a sharp pain in my chest, as if someone had taken all 7 years of my life and compressed them into a few pages of paper. I signed it electronically. My finger paused for a second before I clicked confirm. Then I clicked. It's done. That night, Mark called. I watched the phone vibrate, letting it ring until it stopped, and then it rang again. I answered. You signed it? His voice was hoarse. Yes. Are you really that determined? I didn't answer right away. I could hear the sound of the TV in the background. My mother-in-law was probably watching. I pictured him standing in the living room, his back against the wall, the phone pressed to his ear, in the middle of a house I once called my own. I already told you, I replied. I'm not coming back under the old conditions. I'm trying to convince Mom, he said quickly. Megan also said she won't take the money anymore. I smiled faintly. Not taking it now, or just waiting for another time? Mark? I cut him off, my voice still calm. I don't believe in verbal promises anymore. I need action. He was silent. Then he asked, his voice softer, Do you really want to cut all ties? I looked out at the yard, where my father was watering his plants, his figure thin but steady. I looked into the kitchen, where my mother was rinsing rice. I spoke deliberately. I want to be respected. If this marriage can't give me that, then cutting ties is just a matter of time. He said nothing more. The call ended in silence. 2 days later, I returned to the city to meet with the court. Leah came with me. Before I left, my mother pressed some money, wrapped in a handkerchief, into my hand. I don't have much, but take this, just in case. I tried to refuse, but she held my hand tightly. Take it. Don't let yourself be in a weak position. I didn't refuse again. I knew that accepting it now wasn't about dependence, but about accepting love. The filing process was quicker than I expected. The public service office was lit by fluorescent lights, with plastic chairs lined up in neat rows. I sat there, holding my documents, until my name was called. When the clerk asked if I confirmed my request for divorce, I answered without hesitation. Yes, I confirm. My voice was clear and steady. Leaving the courthouse, Leah patted my shoulder. Step 1 is done. I exhaled. The sky that day was gray but not heavy. I felt like I was standing in the wind, no longer trapped within 4 invisible walls. That evening, I returned to Leah's apartment. There was an envelope on the table. What's this? I asked. Mark sent it, Leah replied. He dropped it off this morning. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. Mark's handwriting was the same, neat but a little stiff. Leah, I'm sorry for all the pain I've caused you. I spoke with Mom. She said if you come back, we can pretend none of this ever happened. I hope you'll reconsider. Not a single word about the money, not a single word about the boundaries I had mentioned. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. So? Leah asked. Same old story, I replied, still treating everything as a family matter that can just be swept under the rug. Leah nodded. So you have your answer. That night, I lay awake for a long time, thinking about the early days of my relationship with Mark. He was gentle then, quiet, always yielding to me. I used to believe that if I was tactful enough, patient enough, everything would be fine. But I was wrong. Some things, the more you endure, the more people take them for granted. A week later, my mother-in-law came to find me. She stood outside Leah's apartment, dressed neatly, her hair in a tight bun. Seeing her didn't surprise me, but my heart still clenched. Leah stood inside, looking at me, waiting for my decision. I nodded and opened the door. Please come in for some water, Mom, I said. She sat on the sofa, her back straight, her eyes scanning the small room. You live here? Yes. She cleared her throat. I came to talk things out. I was too angry that day. I sat across from her, my hands in my lap. I'm listening. I don't deny that I said some harsh things, she continued, but I did it for the family. I looked at her, saying nothing. Megan is your sister-in-law, she added. You should help if you can. I smiled very faintly. Mom, I've already said I won't help with my money, and I won't come back if things stay the same. She frowned. Are you really going to make a big deal out of this? I'm just protecting myself. She looked at me for a long time. Her eyes were no longer as sharp as that day, but they weren't soft either. So what do you intend to do? I've already filed the petition, I said. You don't need to persuade me anymore. She was stunned. After a moment, she stood up. You've got guts. She walked out without looking back. The door closed, and I sat still, my heart pounding, but my mind was very clear. I knew, from that moment on, there was no turning back. Leah came out and placed a hand on my shoulder. You okay? I nodded. I'm okay. At least I'm not lying to myself anymore. Outside the balcony, it started to rain. I stood there, letting the cool drops hit my hand. I knew the days ahead would bring more turmoil, mediation, arguments, perhaps more pain. But I also knew I would never go back to being the woman who bowed her head. I texted my parents. I'm okay. I'm doing what I need to do. My mother replied instantly. I believe in you. Just those 3 words were enough to give me the strength to go on. After my mother-in-law left in silence, I existed in a long period of quiet. The insistent calls stopped, the coercive texts ceased, and there was no genuine apology. The silence wasn't pleasant, but it was necessary, like leaving a wound open to the air after pulling out a thorn so it can heal. I returned to work after nearly 2 weeks off. The office was the same, my desk was the same, but I was different. Colleagues asked a few questions, and I smiled and gave short answers. I didn't want to share the details, not out of shame, but because I no longer felt the need to explain my life to others. That afternoon, Leah texted me that the mediation notice had arrived. I stared at the words for a long time. Mediation. The word sounded gentle, but I knew it would be a true confrontation. No more hiding, no more talking through phones or third parties. It would be me, Mark, and all the things that had never been said aloud. That night, I returned to Leah's apartment and organized my documents again. Everything was in order: the marriage certificate, bank statements, the condo purchase agreement, loan documents. I saw Mark's name on the deed. He was the sole owner. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. I had trusted him, believing that a married couple didn't need to draw lines. Looking back, I didn't blame myself. I just saw how naive I had been. Are you nervous about tomorrow? Leah asked as she poured me a glass of water. Yes, I answered honestly, but not scared. Leah smiled. That's enough. The next morning, I arrived at the courthouse early. The hallway was long, with plastic chairs lined up. I sat down, my hands on my lap, breathing evenly. Mark arrived later with his mother. Seeing her, I gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. She didn't respond, just turned her head away. Mark looked at me, his eyes weary, a look both familiar and distant. We were called into the mediation room. It wasn't large, with a long wooden table and chairs facing each other. The mediator went through some formalities and then turned to me. Do you still wish to proceed with your request for divorce? Yes, I do. My voice came out clear. I didn't look at Mark when I said it. The mediator turned to him. Do you have any objections? Mark cleared his throat. I don't want a divorce. My mother-in-law immediately chimed in, her voice sharp. Our family does not agree. It's normal for couples to argue. My daughter-in-law is just being too hot-headed. I sat up straight, not interjecting. I waited until I was asked. Miss Leah, the mediator said, could you please explain the reasons for the conflict? I nodded. We have had long-standing conflicts. I have not been respected in this marriage. My personal finances were interfered with, and I was coerced and threatened with divorce if I did not comply with my in-laws' demands. My mother-in-law slammed her hand on the table. You are lying and slandering me. I was only giving advice. I turned to her, looking her directly in the eye for the first time, my voice calm. You said if I didn't give you the money, we should get a divorce. That is not advice. The room was silent for a few seconds. Mark looked down. The mediator took notes and then asked, Mr. Mark, do you have anything to say about this? Mark hesitated. My family said some things that weren't right at the time, but I told my mother we wouldn't force her anymore. I smiled faintly. You said that after I had already left the house, and you never said it while I was still there. Mark was silent. In the mediation room, that silence was no longer a safe choice. It was evidence of his avoidance. The mediator sighed and spoke in a neutral tone. Mediation can only succeed if both parties are willing. Miss Leah, if Mr. Mark commits to changing, would you reconsider? I thought for a moment, then replied, if it's just a verbal commitment, then no. I have given too many chances. My mother-in-law turned to Mark, her voice sharp. Say something. Mark looked at me, his expression a clear mix of confusion and helplessness. Leah, I'm asking you to give me more time. I looked at him for a long time. In that moment, I saw the man I had once loved, but I also clearly saw the man who was not strong enough to protect his wife. I've given you 7 years, I said. Any more time just means I'll be the one waiting again. I don't want that anymore. The mediation ended without an agreement. The mediator announced the case would proceed to a hearing. As I stood up, my legs felt a bit weak, but I walked steadily. Outside the room, my mother-in-law pulled Mark aside, whispering something urgently. I couldn't hear, nor did I need to. Leah was waiting for me in the hallway. Seeing me, she asked quietly, "Okay?" I nodded. "It's done." We left the courthouse. The sun was bright outside. I stood for a moment and realized the back of my shirt was damp with sweat. But it was the sweat of confrontation, not of fear. That evening, Mark called me. I answered. "Are you really not coming back?" he asked, his voice tired. "You already know the answer. I'm afraid of losing you." I closed my eyes. Those words came far too late. "You weren't afraid when I was crying alone," I said. "You're only afraid now that I'm leaving." He didn't reply. "Mark," I continued slowly, "I don't hate you. But I cannot continue to live in a marriage where I have to protect myself from my own in-laws." "We can move out," he said hastily. "We'll rent our own place." I was quiet. This was the first time he had ever suggested that. "I'm saying this for you." "No," I replied. "You're saying it because you understand the problem." "What's the difference?" he asked. "It's different," I said. "If I came back, the same thing would just happen again the next time there was a problem." The call ended. I put the phone down, my heart heavy but no longer deceived. In the following days, my mother-in-law called my parents. My mother recounted the conversation, her voice sad but not blaming. "Your mother-in-law said a lot of things, but I only said one thing. My daughter doesn't live off anyone. She works. She supports herself. If your family doesn't respect her, then let her come home to her parents." Hearing my mother say that, I cried. Not because I was hurt, but because I knew I wasn't alone. One afternoon, Megan texted me a single line. "Was it worth it to do all this?" I looked at the screen, thought for a moment, and replied, "Whether it's worth it depends on whether you can see things from my position." Megan didn't text back. I started looking for my own apartment. I couldn't stay at Leah's forever. I needed my own space, no matter how small. I found a rental in a quieter neighborhood, a place with enough light and peace. The day I moved in, I only had a few boxes of belongings. I stood in the middle of the empty room, feeling an emptiness in my heart, but it was the kind of emptiness that could be filled with new things. That night, I sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, and looked through old photos on my phone. Wedding photos, travel photos, family photos. I didn't delete them, I just turned off the screen. I would not deny my past, but I would not carry it with me either. I texted Leah. "I've moved out." She replied immediately. "Congratulations." I smiled. For the first time, the word congratulations associated with the end of my marriage didn't sound bitter. Outside, the city lights flickered on. I stood by the window, watching the traffic below, feeling calmer than I had expected. I knew the court hearing was still ahead. Disputes were still unresolved, and gossip would surely follow. But I also knew I had already taken the hardest step. I had dared to stand up for myself. My new apartment had the faint smell of old paint and wood dust. At night, with the lights off, the sound of traffic was distinct. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to remind me that I was living in this city, no longer hiding in the shell of someone else's family. I lay on my side, looking at the ceiling, my hand on my chest, my heartbeat slowly returning to normal. For the first time in years, I didn't have to worry about waking up early to cook for someone else, or wonder if my mother-in-law was in a good mood, if my sister-in-law needed money, or if my husband was upset about something. The thought made tears well up again, but they were different tears, no longer choked with sorrow. The next morning, I woke up early and made myself a simple bowl of noodles with an egg. I sat alone, eating and watching the sunlight stream through the small window, feeling lighter. I focused on my work, trying not to think about the upcoming court date. But that afternoon, Leah called. The other side's lawyer sent their response. I gripped the phone. What did they say? They are contesting the divorce. Mark claims he still has feelings for you and is requesting more time for reconciliation. I gave a small, bitter laugh. I expected as much. What about his mother? I asked. She submitted a statement claiming the daughter-in-law is disrespectful and selfish, destroying the family over money. I was silent. Those words were no longer new to me. They were exactly what she had said to my face, only now they were written on paper with an official stamp. When I left work that afternoon, Mark was waiting for me outside the company's entrance. He had lost more weight. His eyes were sunken. I stopped, not trying to avoid him. What are you doing here? I asked. I just want to talk, he replied, his voice low. We've already said everything there is to say. No, he said quickly. I haven't said everything. I glanced around. Many colleagues were walking past. Their curiosity piqued. I pointed to a coffee shop across the street. 5 minutes. We sat facing each other. Mark looked down. I don't want a divorce. You already said that, I replied. From your own mouth. I said it when I was angry, Mark pleaded. You know I didn't mean it. No, I said. I know that in that moment you meant it. He looked up, his eyes a mixture of pleading and helplessness. My mom, she's not used to being defied. When you left, she was in shock. I smiled sadly. You talk about your mom's feelings, but what about mine? I can move out, he said. I'll rent a place. I shook my head. You're saying this too late. Better late than never, Mark said urgently. It's too late because you're only thinking about losing me, I replied, not because you understand what I endured. He was silent. Mark, I continued slowly, if that day, when your mother said no money, then divorce, you had stood up and said just one thing, that's my wife's money. No one has the right to force her, then today would be different. I'm sorry, he whispered. I looked at him for a long time, then stood up. An apology can't change the past. I left the coffee shop. Mark didn't follow. Back in my apartment, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was low. Are you okay, honey? I'm okay, Mom. Your father heard that your in-laws are making things difficult. I know. Don't be afraid, she said. Your father and I are here for you. Hearing that, I burst into tears. I was in my 30s, yet all it took was my mother saying she was there for me for all my defenses to crumble. That weekend, I went home. My father met me at the edge of the village. He looked older than before. On the way home, he didn't ask much, just said that being home was what mattered. The meal that day was simple. My mother put a piece of fish in my bowl. Eat up, you're too thin. My father put down his cup and looked at me. You've made up your mind? Yes. No regrets? Not so far. My father nodded slowly. Divorce isn't a failure. Living the wrong way and not daring to fix it, that's failure. I looked at my father, tears welling up again. That night, Megan called me. I was a bit surprised, but I answered. Leah, she said, her voice hesitant. I'm sorry. Sorry for what? I asked. For what I said before, Megan replied. I wasn't thinking. I was quiet for a few seconds. You don't need to apologize to me. You were just repeating what you were taught to believe. But I saw Mom was going too far, she said quietly. When I tried to say something, she yelled at me. I sighed. Megan, I don't blame you, but I'm not coming back. I hope you understand. Megan didn't say anything more, just replied, yes. After hanging up, I felt a little lighter, not because I felt vindicated, but because someone from his family had finally said something fair. The following week, the official court summons arrived. I read every line carefully. The hearing date was not far off. Leah told me to prepare myself, as the other side might get aggressive about assets. As predicted, Mark requested that all assets be split 50-50, including the bonus I received from my company. He claimed it was income earned during the marriage. I wasn't surprised. I just felt a pang of pain, not for the money, but for the cold, calculated nature of it all. "He's pushing himself further away," Leah said. "Yes," I replied, "but that's good. It means I have nothing left to regret." One afternoon, my mother-in-law came to my apartment building. She stood at my door, looking tired but her gaze still sharp. "Why are you doing this?" she asked directly. I opened the door wider but didn't invite her in, just stood in the doorway. "I'm not doing anything, ma'am, I'm just leaving." "You're tearing my family apart," she hissed. "This family started falling apart the moment I was no longer treated like a family member," I replied. "You're being disrespectful," she snapped. I looked at her calmly. "Ma'am, if you came here to yell at me, I'm going to have to close the door." She was taken aback. She probably never expected me to dare say such a thing. "You think you've won?" she said. "You might not get anything in court." I nodded. "I don't need to win. I just need to be free." She stood there for a moment, then turned and left. Her back seemed more stooped than I remembered. That night, I tossed and turned for a long time. I thought about my mother-in-law, about the years she, too, had been a daughter-in-law, about the hardships she must have endured. I didn't hate her. I just couldn't continue to sacrifice myself to soothe her insecurities. As the court date approached, I prepared my clothes and documents. Looking at myself in the mirror, I saw a woman who was tired but no longer lost. I knew where I was going. I texted Leah, "Whatever the outcome, I'm not turning back." Leah replied, "That's all that matters." I put down my phone and turned off the light. Outside, the traffic continued its endless flow. I whispered to myself, "I'm going to be okay." The night before the court date, I barely slept. The small apartment was silent, except for the steady ticking of the wall clock. I lay on my back, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. My mind wasn't filled with fear, but with a stranger feeling, anticipation. Not because I was worried about losing, but because I knew tomorrow was a dividing line. After tomorrow, no matter the outcome, I would no longer be in limbo. I woke up very early. I brewed a cup of black coffee and drank it slowly. I chose a simple outfit: a white blouse, black slacks, and flat shoes. Not to appear weak, nor to prove my strength. I just wanted to look like myself. Leah came to pick me up. She looked me over from head to toe and nodded. Good. With that one word, I felt more resolute. Outside the courthouse, Mark was already there with his mother. She wore a dark-colored dress, her face tense. Mark, however, looked visibly exhausted, his shoulders slumped. Seeing them together, I instinctively remembered all the times I had stood behind Mark, silent, while he spoke with his mother, telling myself to just endure a little longer. The thought felt distant now, like a story about someone else. We entered the courtroom. The atmosphere was solemn, filled with the soft scrape of chairs and the rustle of papers. I sat up straight, my hands folded neatly on the table. When the judge asked for personal information, I answered each question clearly. When it was time to present our case, Mark's lawyer stood up. He spoke of marital bonds, of conflicts that weren't severe enough for divorce, of a willingness to reconcile. I listened without reacting. I had heard those words many times before, only today they were delivered in a more formal tone. Then came the issue of assets. Mark's lawyer proposed an equal division of all property acquired during the marriage, including the bonus I had received from my company. Hearing it, my heart tightened slightly, not because of the money, but because of the cold, legalized calculation. When it was my turn, Leah stood up, her voice clear and articulate. She presented my employment contract, the bonus award letter, and bank statements, proving it was personal income awarded for individual achievement and deposited into an account solely in my name. She spoke of how I was coerced, threatened with divorce if I didn't hand over the money. Every sentence she spoke felt like a retelling of my own life, but this time, I wasn't alone. The judge turned to me. "Miss Leah, do you have anything to add?" I stood up. The feeling was very clear. My heart was pounding, but my mind was sharp. Your Honor, I said, I am not asking for a division of marital property. I am only asking for a divorce and the protection of my personal assets. I tried many times to preserve this marriage, but I cannot continue to live in a relationship where I am not respected. My mother-in-law shot up from her seat. She's lying. She's making it all up. We never forced her to do anything. The judge banged the gavel, calling for order. I looked at her, no longer with fear, but with a sense of sadness. Sadness for a woman who was so accustomed to wielding her maternal authority that she no longer recognized any boundaries. The court recessed for deliberation. I sat down, my hands cold as ice. Leah gently touched my arm. Stay calm. The waiting period wasn't long, but it was enough for me to reflect on everything. I looked at Mark. He sat with his head bowed low. I wondered if, at that moment, he had stood up and said, "That money belongs to my wife. I won't contest it." Would I have softened? The answer came quickly. No. Not because I was hard-hearted, but because things had simply gone too far. The judicial panel returned, and the judge read the verdict. I listened to every word. The request for divorce was granted. The request to divide my personal bonus was denied. Other marital assets would be handled according to regulations, but since the condo was in Mark's name and I was not requesting a division, my voluntary waiver was noted. When the final bang of the gavel echoed, I sat still for a few seconds, not because I didn't understand, but because I needed a moment to process it. I was divorced. The two words didn't hurt as I once thought they would. It felt like taking off a coat that was too tight. My shoulders suddenly felt lighter. My mother-in-law stood up abruptly, her face pale. She stared at me, her eyes a mixture of anger and bewilderment. Mark remained seated, motionless. I stood up, bowed my head to the judge, and turned to leave. I didn't look back. I knew if I did, I would see what I once loved, what I once hoped for, and I didn't want to falter. Outside the courthouse, sunlight streamed down the steps. Leah let out a sigh of relief. It's over. I nodded. My legs were trembling slightly, but my heart was light, so light that I felt I could breathe more deeply than I had in years. Mark called out to me. I turned, standing a few feet away from him. "Leah," he said, his voice hoarse. I never thought it would come to this. I looked at him for a long time, then spoke without reproach. I never thought so either, but I don't regret it. "You've lost me," he said. "You lost me the moment you chose to stay silent," I replied. He lowered his head. His mother stood behind him, saying nothing. I turned and walked away. That evening, I returned to my apartment. I sat on the floor, leaning against the wall. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to cry. Not tears of pain, but tears of release. They flowed hot and then dried on my face. I wiped my cheeks, stood up, and opened the window. A breeze blew in, carrying the scent of city dust and sun. That night, I called my parents. "It's done," I told them. My mother was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Are you okay, honey?" "I'm okay." My father's voice came on the line, low and steady. "Come home for a few days." "Yes." I hung up. Looking around the small room, I knew that from this day forward, I was no longer someone's wife, but I was still my parents' daughter. I was still myself, and I had a whole life ahead of me to live the way I chose. I texted Leah. "Thank you," she replied. "You did it yourself." I smiled. That night, I slept a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind of peaceful rest I had lost a long, long time ago. After the court hearing, I went home to my parents, just as my father had suggested. The afternoon bus seemed to move slower than usual, or perhaps my heart was different, making the familiar road feel longer. I leaned my head against the window, watching the trees recede, feeling an emptiness that was not despair. It was the emptiness of a house cleared of old furniture, still dusty and cluttered, but ready to be rearranged. My mother was waiting at the gate. Seeing me, she didn't ask questions, just took my hand and led me inside. Her hand was thin, warm, and trembled slightly. I knew she had been holding her breath with worry for months. "Time for dinner," she said. "Your father is waiting." The meal that evening was nothing special, a simple soup, some stewed meat, and salted pickles, but I ate with relish. My father sat across from me, occasionally placing a piece of meat in my bowl without saying much. When I put down my utensils, he finally asked, "Is it all over, son?" "Yes." "No one is giving you a hard time anymore?" "No." He nodded slowly. "That's good." With just those 2 words, I felt a weight lift from my chest. I didn't need praise or vindication. I just needed my parents to understand and believe in me. In the following days, I stayed home, helping my mother in the kitchen and weeding the garden with my father. Every morning, I woke up early, breathing in the fresh air, listening to the rooster crow and the dog's bark. These seemingly trivial sounds helped ground me, reminding me that life was more than just a failed marriage. Neighbors came to visit, some with genuine concern, some with curiosity, and some with words that were half pity, half judgment. My mother would just smile and say briefly, "She's handling her own affairs." My father would remain silent. His silence was a shield. Standing behind him, I felt protected, just like when I was a child. One afternoon, Mark called. I saw his name on the screen, hesitated for a second, but answered. "You're back home?" he asked. "Yes. I want to talk." "About what?" He was silent for a moment, then said, "I'm sorry for everything." I didn't reply immediately. I could hear the traffic from where he was standing, and a very faint sigh. "I'm not angry," I said, "but I'm not coming back either." "I know," Mark replied, his voice sad. "I just wanted you to know. I regret it." I closed my eyes. If he had said those words sooner, things might have been different. But now, they were just a belated piece of a puzzle that no longer mattered. "Take care of yourself," I said. "I'm hanging up." After the call, I sat still for a long time. I didn't feel pain or relief, just a quiet sense of finality, like bidding farewell to an acquaintance leaving your life, knowing you would only see them again in memories. That night, Leah texted me that Mark's side had not filed an appeal. I read the message and let out a long breath. So, it was really over. No more legal entanglements, no more waiting for documents. Everything had concluded more neatly than I had imagined. I returned to the city after a week. The small apartment was still quiet, the afternoon sun casting patterns on the tiled floor. I rearranged my belongings, hung up a new curtain, and bought a small potted plant for the windowsill. These small acts made me feel like I was truly starting a new life, not just a temporary one. I went back to my company with a new mindset. My boss called me in to discuss a new project and offered me more responsibility. He looked at me directly and asked, "Are you okay?" "Yes, I'm okay." He nodded. "If you need any support, just let me know." That was it. I was grateful. Not for special treatment, but for being treated like an adult responsible for her own life. One afternoon, Megan texted me. This time, the message was longer. "Leah, I'm sorry for what happened. I don't dare say much to Mom, but I know you weren't wrong. I just hope you'll be happy." I read it a few times, then replied, "Thank you. You be happy too." We didn't exchange any more messages, but I knew that at least between Megan and me, things were no longer so thorny. One weekend evening, I sat alone in my room and reviewed my bank account. The bonus was still there. I decided to use a portion to help my parents with some debts and put the rest in savings. Not to prove a point, but to remind myself that I could take care of myself, that I didn't need to trade my self-respect for a false sense of security. I bought a new journal. On the first page I wrote, "Starting over, no grand pronouncements, no lofty promises, just starting over, one day at a time." There were nights when I still dreamed of the old condo, of the dinner table, of my mother-in-law's voice, of Mark speaking. I would wake up with a racing heart, but then I would realize they were just memories finding their way out. I didn't chase them, nor did I push them away. I let them pass. One day, I ran into Mark by chance on the street. He was with a friend. Seeing me, he stopped and nodded a greeting. I nodded back without a word. The moment was brief, but it was enough for me to know I had truly moved on. I called my mother to tell her I was doing well, that work was good. My mother laughed. "Then I can rest easy. Take care of yourselves, Mom and Dad. We will. Come home when you have time." I hung up. Standing by the window, watching the city light up, the endless stream of people, each carrying their own story. My story had turned to a new chapter. It wasn't dazzling or dramatic, but it was a chapter I had the right to write myself. I knew there would still be challenges, judgments, moments of loneliness and weakness, but I also knew I now had the strength to face them. I was no longer afraid to start over at this age, because I understood that starting over wasn't a loss, but a form of courage. I closed my journal, turned off the light, and lay down. Outside, the city was still awake, and I allowed myself to rest, so I could wake up tomorrow and continue to live, not as someone's wife, but as myself. My life after the divorce wasn't as dramatic as people might imagine. There were no spectacular falls, no glamorous transformations. It was just a slow, steady procession of days, like the calm after a storm, when everything is still unsettled but the thunder has passed. I went to work, came home to my apartment, cooked, cleaned, read, and went to bed earlier. It was all so simple that I sometimes surprised myself. Living alone wasn't as scary as I had thought. That month, the company launched a new project, and I was made the team lead. The pressure was high, but I found myself more focused than ever. There were no midday calls from my mother-in-law, no subtle texts about money, no anxiety about what to cook for dinner to please everyone. I just had to do my job well, and I did. One afternoon, my boss called me into his office. He looked at me and said directly, "I know you've been through some personal things, but I've also noticed that your work performance hasn't suffered at all." "Yes," I replied, offering no further explanation. "If you're ready, I'd like to propose you for a senior project manager position." I was taken aback, not by ambition, but by the realization that when I let go of something that had consumed so much of my energy, other doors quietly opened. "I need some time to think," I said. "Of course," he nodded, "but I have faith in you." That night, I called Leah. She heard the news and laughed. "See? Life doesn't fail you. You were just tying yourself down before." I laughed with her, but I knew it wasn't that life hadn't failed me, but that I had stopped waiting for permission from others to live well. That weekend, I went home. The moment my mother saw me, she asked, "Are you eating properly?" "Yes." "Are you sleeping well?" "Yes." She nodded, satisfied. "You look like you've put on some weight." My father sat nearby, sipping his tea, and said slowly, "If you get tired up there, just come home. The door is always open." I smiled. "Yes." That afternoon, I went to the garden with my father. He pointed to a row of vegetables he had planted. "Everything needs time," he said. "If you rush it, the roots won't take hold." I knew he wasn't just talking about vegetables. Another evening, while I was cooking, my phone vibrated. It was a call from my mother-in-law. I stared at the screen for a long time. She hadn't contacted me since the trial. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Leah." Her voice was hoarse, different from before. "I want to talk." I waited for her to continue. "I know it's too late for me to say anything now," she went on, "but I still want to say one thing. I'm sorry." The two words from her lips stunned me. I didn't feel immediate relief or a surge of emotion, just a quiet feeling, like hearing the first drops of rain after a long drought. "I'm not good with soft words," she said. "I'm used to being demanding. I thought I was doing what was best for the family, but I never thought about you." I took a deep breath. "I'm listening. Mark, he barely talks anymore," she said. I know I pushed things too far. I didn't answer right away. I thought of the years we lived together, of the times I endured, the times I swallowed my tears. Then I spoke very slowly. "I don't blame you anymore, but I'm not coming back either. I hope you can understand that." She was silent for a long time, then whispered, "I understand." The call ended. I put the phone down, my hand trembling slightly, not because I was emotional, but because I realized some apologies aren't meant to mend, but to close. And that was enough. A few days later, Mark texted me a single line. "Mom called you, didn't she?" I replied, "Yes." I'm glad she was able to say it. I didn't write anything more. Not because I was cold, but because between us, everything had already served its purpose. The following month, I accepted the promotion. Leah took me out to celebrate. Sitting in the restaurant, she looked at me and said, "So how do you feel now?" I thought for a moment. Not ecstatic, but peaceful. Leah nodded. "Peace is the most expensive thing." That night, back in my apartment, I cleaned out my closet. I got rid of clothes I hadn't worn in years, things tied to a past chapter. I kept only what made me feel comfortable, as if I were decluttering myself. There were still moments of loneliness, rainy nights, sick days, moments when I looked around and there was no one to lean on. But unlike before, I didn't see loneliness as a failure. I saw it as part of the journey, like the darkness needed to appreciate the light. One day, I received a wedding invitation from an acquaintance. I held the card and smiled. I no longer felt a pang of envy. I understood that happiness takes different forms for different people. Not everyone has to walk the path of marriage to be considered whole. I started taking a short course on management. In the evenings, I studied and took notes, feeling busy in a positive way. I no longer had much time for nostalgia or self-blame. One late night, I opened my old journal, turning back to the page that said, "Starting over." I added a new line below it. "I have come a long way." That was it. I didn't need grand promises. I just needed to know I wasn't standing still. Outside, the wind was picking up. I stood by the window, watching the pale yellow streetlights. I thought about the road ahead. Maybe there would be challenges, maybe I would get tired. But I also knew I had learned to stand on my own 2 feet. I was no longer a woman living to please others. Nor was I a failure because of a broken marriage. I was just me, living my life, slowly but truly. I turned off the light and lay down. In the darkness, I was no longer afraid. I felt a peace that was real, grounded, and enough to make me believe I was on the right path. After my promotion, the rhythm of my life quickened, but it was no longer chaotic. Work pulled me forward in a way that was different from before. It wasn't because I needed to escape something, but because I wanted to move forward. Each morning, I woke up a little earlier, made my own coffee, watched the sunlight filter through the narrow window of my apartment, and then left for work. I no longer checked my phone constantly, no longer waited for any particular message. The things that once made me anxious had receded into the background. Some nights, I stayed late at the office, reviewing project plans alone. Outside, the rain would patter on the roof. I suddenly remembered how, on rainy nights like this, I used to rush home, afraid of displeasing my mother-in-law, afraid of Mark being hungry, afraid of the dinner getting cold. The thought made me smile softly. Not a sarcastic smile, but one of recognition at how far I had come. Leah still visited me on weekends. We would cook, talk about everything and nothing. One day, she looked at me and said bluntly, "You've really changed." "How so?" "You no longer ask me if you were wrong." I was quiet for a few seconds, then replied, "Because I no longer need anyone's validation." Leah nodded. She understood. One Friday afternoon, I got a call from my father. His voice was low and slow. "Can you come home this weekend, son? It's your grandfather's memorial." Yes. Back home, I felt myself shift into a different rhythm. The house was the same. The areca palm in the yard was a little taller than the last time I was here. My mother was overjoyed to see me, fussing over me with endless questions. My father just smiled and said if I was thin, I should eat more. The memorial was simple, with many relatives present. Some looked at me with pity, some asked questions discreetly, and some were blunt. "So you're divorced now, niece?" I didn't flinch. "Yes, I am." No further explanation. It wasn't needed. My mother sat beside me, saying nothing, just putting more food in my bowl. That gesture meant more to me than any words of defense. That afternoon, I went to light incense for my grandfather. The smoke curled upwards, the familiar scent of sandalwood filling the air. I stood in silence, whispering in my heart, "I'm okay now, Grandpa." I don't know if he heard me, but my heart felt lighter. That night, after everyone was asleep, my mother knocked on my door and brought in a glass of warm water. "Are you asleep?" "Not yet, Mom." She sat on the edge of the bed, silent for a moment, then asked, "Are you sad?" I thought for a moment. Sometimes I'm sad, but I'm not suffering anymore. My mother nodded, her eyes a little red. "I was just so afraid you were enduring it all alone." "I'm not alone," I said. "I have you and Dad, my job, my friends, and I have myself." She squeezed my hand, saying no more. That squeeze was as warm and firm as when I was a child. After the memorial, I returned to the city. One morning, as I walked into the office, the receptionist told me I had a visitor. I froze when I saw Mark in the lobby. He was thinner than before, his shirt looking too big for him, an awkward expression on his face. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice calm. "I just wanted to give you this," he said, handing me an envelope. I opened it. It was a copy of the transfer deed for the remaining small marital assets, finalized as per the court's agreement, though Mark had voluntarily done it earlier than required. "You didn't have to rush," I said. "I wanted to get it done," Mark replied, "so we can both move on." I nodded. "Thank you." He stood there, looking like he wanted to say more, but didn't. In the end, he just said, "You look well." "I am." He turned and walked away. I watched him go, feeling no regret, just a quiet, final punctuation mark on a chapter that was now closed. That afternoon, my former mother-in-law called unexpectedly. I hesitated, then answered. "Leah." Her voice was no longer as harsh as before. I wanted to check in. "I'm fine. How have you been?" "I'm doing okay." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I know I have no right to say anything anymore, but I hope you will live a good life." I took a deep breath. "Thank you," I said. The call ended quickly. I didn't feel heavy. The old resentments seemed to have fallen away on their own. My work progressed well, with the project entering a critical phase. I was busy, but not exhausted. I learned to manage my time, to say no when necessary. Some evenings, I would take long walks alone, listening to music, my thoughts wandering. I was no longer afraid of the empty spaces in my mind. I was learning to be with myself without feeling a void. One day, I ran into Megan at the supermarket. She saw me, hesitated, then walked over. "Hi, Leah." "Hi. You look better now," she said. "I've rented my own place, too." "That's good," I replied. Megan bit her lip. I was so immature back then. I looked at her and saw a young woman who was less impulsive than before. I said, "We all have moments like that." We said our goodbyes and went our separate ways. I didn't dwell on it. That month, I decided to move to a slightly smaller but brighter apartment. The day I moved, Leah came to help. We laughed and talked as we cleaned and hung curtains. When we were done, I stood in the middle of the new room and felt my own world expand. "Housewarming party when?" Leah asked. "Let me get settled first," I smiled. The first night in my new home, I opened the windows to let the breeze in. I thought about the journey I had been on, not with regret, but with acknowledgement. I had been weak, submissive, and afraid. But I had also been brave enough to walk away, to let go, and to face the truth. I took out my journal and wrote one more line after I have come a long way, and I am living. Nothing more, just that. My phone buzzed. A text from my father. "If you're free this weekend, come home for dinner." I smiled and texted back, "Yes." Outside, the city was still noisy, but inside me, there was a steady quiet. I knew the road ahead was still long. Maybe I would love again, maybe not. But whatever happened, I would never trade myself for anything or anyone again. I turned off the light and lay down. In the darkness, I no longer felt empty. I felt I was in the right place, at the right time. And for me, that was a kind of happiness. My life settled into another new rhythm, neither rushed nor slow. Each day felt like a steady, forward-moving line, just enough for me to see my own progress. My new apartment greeted me each morning with light pouring through the large window. I bought a small desk to place near it, where I would read and write in the evenings, sometimes just watching the city light up. There were moments of such profound quiet that I worried I would get used to it. But then I realized that getting used to peace was a good thing. Work drew me into a world of meetings, plans, and long presentations. I worked more than before, but no longer felt drained. I knew when to stop. I learned to delegate, to trust others. One day, a new colleague asked me, "Leah, are you always this calm?" I smiled. "No, but I choose not to let things sweep me away." I said it not to teach, but to remind myself. One afternoon, Leah dropped by with 2 hot cups of tea. We sat on the sofa, talking about little things. She looked around the new apartment and said, "This place suits you." Yes, I replied. I think so too. She was quiet for a moment, then asked, Have you thought about dating again? I considered the question. It didn't make me uncomfortable or flustered. I have, I said, but I'm not in a hurry. You're not scared? Leah asked. Of course I am, I laughed, but I'm not hiding from it. Leah nodded. We clinked our cups, no more words needed. At the end of the month, I went home. My parents were used to my regular trips back and forth. My mother still asked about every meal and every night's sleep. My father was still a man of few words, but every time I came home, he would brew a pot of tea and sit with me on the porch. One day, he looked at me for a long time and said, You're different now. Different how, Dad? Stronger. I smiled. I took those 2 words as the highest compliment. One evening, I was in the market with my mother. She walked slowly, and I walked beside her. On the way home, she suddenly said, I used to think a woman had to endure to keep a family together. I looked at her. I think differently now, she continued. It's not worth it to endure if you lose yourself. I squeezed her hand. Sometimes the greatest lessons arrive late, but when they do, they stay. Back in the city, I was invited to speak at an industry conference. I stood on stage, presenting my project and answering questions. Under the bright lights, my heart beat fast, but I didn't tremble. When I finished, people came up to shake my hand, complimenting my clarity and conviction. I bowed my head and said thank you. I knew this was the result of all the nights I had chosen to stay with my work, with myself, instead of chasing expectations that were not mine. After the conference, I received a long-term collaboration offer. I took the contract home and read every clause carefully. There was no one pressuring me, no one deciding for me. I called Leah and asked her to review the legal points. She laughed. You're not the same person who used to sign things blindly. I laughed too. The caution I had now wasn't born of fear, but of self-respect. One rainy evening, I received a text from Mark. This time, it wasn't about money or paperwork, just a short sentence. I'm transferring to a new job, far away. I read it, thought for a moment, and replied, I wish you the best, nothing more. I put the phone down. Outside the window, the rain fell steadily. My heart was calm. The old ties had untangled themselves, just like that. A few days later, my former mother-in-law texted me. She didn't call, just a message. I went to the hospital for a checkup. Nothing serious, just letting you know so you can have peace of mind. I typed a few words, stopped, deleted them, and typed again. I hope you feel better soon. I didn't feel fake. I just felt I was distant enough not to be hurt, and close enough not to be cold. Life went on like this. I joined a morning yoga class. The slow movements helped me listen to my body. One day, the instructor said, just let go. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. I let go of the fears that had become a habit that had lived inside me for years. One weekend, I went to an art exhibition alone. I stood for a long time in front of an abstract painting. I didn't fully understand it, but I saw myself in it. The overlapping colors, the seemingly chaotic lines that, from a distance, formed a whole with its own order. I laughed to myself. My life was like that too. On the way home, I stopped at a small coffee shop. I sat by the window and wrote a few lines in my journal. Learning to trust my own rhythm. I didn't write much. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. That evening, I called my father. He answered, his voice warm. Are you eating well, son? Yes, I am. Work is okay? It's okay. That's good, he said. Don't push yourself too hard. Hearing him, my heart softened. My parents' concern was no longer a worry about my weakness, but a caring for my well-being. Another time, I ran into an old acquaintance who had known me when I was still Mark's wife. She looked at me in surprise. Leah, you look so different now. Different how? I asked. You seem lighter, she replied. I smiled. I knew that lightness came from no longer carrying burdens that were not mine. That night, I lay in bed listening to the wind on the balcony. I thought about the future, not in specific plans, but with a feeling of readiness, ready for good things, and for things that might not go as planned. I no longer needed a perfect life. I just needed a life where I was not betraying myself. I opened my journal and wrote one more word under the page titled, Living. Grateful. Grateful for having the courage to walk through it. Grateful for having the strength to start again. Grateful for still having people who loved me the right way. Outside, the city sank into the night. I turned off the light and pulled up the covers. I didn't have big dreams. I just felt that I was standing firmly in this life, on my own 2 feet. Time passed, not with a roar, but with a quiet hum, enough for me to realize one thing clearly. I had stopped living on the defensive. Before, I would wake up each day with a vague sense of apprehension, as if one wrong move would pull me back into the past. Now, I woke up with a different mindset, not always happy, but always intentional. I knew I was living, not just surviving. My new project reached a critical stage. I often stayed late at the office, but it wasn't the same exhaustion as before. One night, the team meeting ended close to 10 p.m. A young employee looked at me and said, half-jokingly, "It must be easy to work so hard when you don't have a family, Leah." The comment hung in the air for a second. I looked at him, not with annoyance, not with defensiveness. "I do have a family," I said. "My parents are back home, and I have myself." He blushed and mumbled an apology. I didn't hold it against him. I understood that for many, family was still defined by marriage, but I also understood that I no longer needed to explain myself to be accepted. That night, I came home late to a city lit up with scattered, glowing windows. I stood on my balcony, looking down at the flow of traffic, and felt a profound sense of calm. I thought that if I hadn't dared to step out back then, none of these ordinary, peaceful moments would exist. The weekend came, and I went home earlier than usual. My mother was drying rice in the yard and called out when she saw me. "You're home early." "I missed you," I replied. She smiled, a gentle, reassured smile. My father was fixing a loose wooden door. I helped him hold the plank steady. As he worked, he said, "Your mother and I used to worry about you so much." "Do you still worry?" I asked. He looked up at me. "We still worry, but we no longer worry that you'll fall." His words made me pause. I realized my parents' anxiety had shifted from fearing my weakness to hoping for my well-being. That small shift in their worry changed everything. That evening, when it was just my mother and me in the kitchen, she said unexpectedly, "An acquaintance asked me about you the other day." I looked at her. "What did you say?" I asked. I told them my daughter went through a marriage not to lose, but to grow. I looked down to hide my stinging eyes. In a small town, news travels fast. Some people felt sympathy, some felt pity, and some felt a different kind of pity. But I no longer let their words touch me deeply. I heard them, and then I let the wind carry them away. Returning to the city, I learned that Mark had officially transferred to a job across the country. The news came from an old mutual friend, not from him. I read it and felt nothing, just another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Some people are only meant to be in a chapter of your life, not the whole book. One afternoon, Leah asked me to go for a walk around the lake. We walked slowly, not saying much. After a while, she spoke. "Do you ever feel like your life is too quiet now?" I laughed. "Is quiet good or bad?" "Good," Leah said. "I'm just afraid you're closing yourself off." I thought for a moment, then said, "I'm not closing myself off. I'm just being selective." Leah nodded. She understood. Not everyone deserves to enter your life again. Being selective isn't being cold, it's self-preservation. One day, I was invited to a partner's birthday party. I hesitated, but I went. I met new people. Some were open and friendly, others just polite. A man a few years older than me was calm and well-spoken. He asked me about my work, my projects. He didn't ask if I had been married, only what I was interested in. I felt at ease. We talked for a while, then went our separate ways. No phone numbers exchanged, no plans to meet again. But I realized I no longer recoiled from a new possibility. I wasn't rushing to grab it, but I wasn't pushing it away either. I was just letting it be what it was. That night at home, I thought for a long time, not about the man, but about myself. I had come a long way from the woman who was more afraid of losing her marriage than losing herself. Another day, I got a call from my former mother-in-law. Her voice was weak. I'm having a small procedure soon. Mark is far away. I'm just letting you know. I was silent for a few seconds, then said, I hope everything goes smoothly. I know you're busy, she said. You don't have to visit. I didn't make any promises, nor did I evade. I'll call to check in later. The call ended. I didn't feel guilty. I no longer felt the need to fulfill any role. I just did what my heart allowed. In the following days, I poured my energy into my work and myself. I booked a short solo trip, not to escape, but to experience. In a strange city, I walked, ate simple food, took a few photos, and then put my phone away. I realized my peace didn't need a witness to be valid. One evening there, I sat alone in a small cafe, listening to soft music. I suddenly remembered the old days, the feeling of being forced to choose between money and marriage, between self-respect and a false peace. If I could go back, I would make the same choice. Not because I was stronger, but because I knew myself better. When I returned, Leah met me at the airport. She looked at me and smiled. You look different again. Different how? I asked. At ease, Leah replied. Like you have nothing left to prove. I nodded. It was true. I no longer needed to prove I was right or wrong. I just needed to live right. That night, I opened my journal. On the last page, I wrote, no longer afraid to begin, no longer afraid to end. I knew my journey wasn't over, but I also knew I had passed the hardest part. Outside, the wind blew gently. I lay down, my heart serene. I didn't know what the future would bring, but I believed that no matter what it was, I would never lose myself again. My life entered a strange new phase. There were no major upheavals, no dramatic climaxes, yet it made me think more deeply than any time before. Perhaps it was because when you're no longer busy defending yourself, the deeper questions begin to surface. I was no longer asking how to survive, but how I wanted to live. One late autumn morning, I woke very early. The city was still misty, the balcony damp with a cool chill. I made coffee, leaned against the window, and looked down at the still empty streets. Suddenly, I thought about being 33. At this age, I used to think I had to have a complete family, a proper home, a clear role in someone else's life. Now, I had a small apartment, a stable job, healthy parents, and a spirit that was no longer in tatters. I asked myself, is this enough? The answer came slowly, but it came. At work, my project received high praise from leadership. My boss called me in to talk about long-term plans, about expanding the team, even suggesting I consider a higher position next year. I listened, not rushing to accept or refuse. I understood I no longer needed to chase achievements to prove anything, but I also didn't want to shrink myself for fear of change. That afternoon, I ate lunch alone at my usual spot. The owner asked, "Not eating with your friend today?" "Not today." "You look different now," she said. "You seem lighter." I smiled. Some people see you only a few times but notice changes that those closest to you sometimes miss. That evening, I got a call from my father. His voice sounded a little different. "Can you come home this weekend? Is something wrong, Dad?" He was quiet for a few seconds, then said, "Your mother's back has been bothering her lately. It's not serious, but I want you to come see." My heart tightened. "Yes, I'll be right there." I took a day off and went home earlier than planned. My mother was still smiling when she saw me, but I noticed the smile was thinner than before. She walked more slowly, her back slightly hunched. At dinner, she put a piece of fish in my bowl. "Eat, you've gotten so thin." I looked at her, a mix of love and worry welling up inside me. I suddenly realized that in all the years I was busy preserving a marriage, my parents had been quietly growing old. That night, after my parents were asleep, I sat alone on the porch. The sound of crickets filled the air. I thought a lot about my parents, about myself, about how I had spent so much time trying to please a family that didn't value me, while unintentionally neglecting the people who loved me unconditionally. The next morning, I told my parents, "I'm thinking that maybe, in the near future, I'll move closer to home, or at least arrange to come back more often." My mother looked at me, surprised. "What about your job up there?" "I can still do it, Mom. I don't want to be so busy worrying about the future that I forget the present." My father nodded, his voice low. "As long as you've thought it through. We're not holding you back, but having you closer would give us peace of mind." His words soothed me. No one was forcing me to sacrifice anything. No one was defining my duties. I was given a choice, and that choice made me want to come back even more. Returning to the city, I thought for a long time about balancing work and family. I spoke frankly with my boss about the possibility of a more flexible work arrangement. He listened and didn't object. "If you can manage the efficiency, I support it." I was surprised but also understood that when you work based on true competence, people respect you more than you think. One evening, Leah dropped by. We cooked and listened to soft music. I told her about my parents, about my thoughts. After listening, she said, "You're entering a new phase." "What phase?" "The phase of living for what truly matters." I nodded. I knew she was right. Around that time, I heard that my former mother-in-law's procedure was successful. Mark called me, his voice tired but light. "Mom's okay. I just wanted to let you know." "Yes," I replied. "That's good." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm getting married soon." I was a little stunned, but not hurt. Just a strange feeling, like hearing that an old acquaintance had moved. Not happy, not sad, just a chapter closed. "I wish you happiness," I said. "Thank you," Mark replied. "I hope you find it too." The call ended. I sat still for a long time. I didn't make comparisons. I didn't ask myself what if. I just understood that everyone has their own path. My path no longer ran parallel to his, and that didn't make me any less valuable. In the following days, I spent more time on myself in a different way. Not to heal anymore, but to build. I reorganized my finances, made a long-term plan, thought about buying a small house in the future, not to tie someone down, but to have a solid place to call my own. One evening, I wrote in my familiar journal. I wrote very slowly. "Happiness is not about having enough people, but about not lacking yourself." I read it again, closed the journal, and set it aside. Outside, the wind was blowing harder. I closed the window and brewed a pot of hot tea. I thought about the life ahead. Maybe I would love again. Maybe I would choose to be alone for a long time. But no matter what, I would not go back to being a woman who traded her inner peace for a title. That night, I called my mother. She answered, her voice familiar. "Honey?" "Yes, Mom. I'm fine, don't worry." "I know," I said, "but I want to come home sooner." My mother was quiet for a few seconds, then laughed. "Okay. You can come home whenever you want." I hung up, my heart warm. I knew not everyone was lucky enough to have a place to return to without questions or scrutiny. I had one, and I cherished it. I lay down and closed my eyes. My mind was no longer filled with broken memories, but with a picture that was slowly coming into focus. I was no longer afraid of the future. I just felt that I was standing very firmly in the present. I moved back home on a very ordinary morning. No fanfare, no send-off party, just my mom and dad standing on the porch. My small suitcase was in the back of the car, filled with clothes, a few books, my laptop, and some personal items. Looking at it, I had to laugh. It turned out that a 7-year marriage could ultimately be packed into so little. My mother leaned against the doorframe, holding a towel, repeating her instructions. "Call me when you get settled. Eat on time. Don't work too hard." "Yes, Mom, I know." My father didn't say much. He just helped me put my bag in the car and gave my shoulder a gentle pat. "Having you closer to home is all we could ask for. As long as you're living peacefully, that's enough." His words made my throat tighten. I nodded, afraid to speak, worried that tears would fall. I got in the car and looked through the window, watching my mother's figure grow smaller. My father stood there until the car was out of sight. I knew that from that day on, I was no longer the daughter-in-law of another family. I was just my parents' daughter. The first few days back were an adjustment to the slower pace of life. Waking up to the sound of roosters, feeling the evening breeze through the bamboo grove, eating dinner together as a family, and turning off the TV early. But strangely, that slow rhythm helped me breathe easier. I no longer had to be wary of anyone's gaze, explain why I was late, or pretend to be happy when I felt empty inside. My work continued. I worked remotely, traveling to the city for occasional meetings. My boss was more respectful of my decision than I had expected. He once told me directly, "I don't keep people based on location. I keep them based on the value of their work." I felt a sense of relief. I realized that as long as I was competent and clear about my own needs, the world wasn't as harsh as I had once thought. One afternoon, Leah came to visit. We sat on the porch, drinking green tea and talking about everything under the sun. She looked around and smiled. "You really fit in here. You look completely different from when you were living with Mark." I smiled too. I couldn't deny it. I noticed I frowned less. I didn't jump when the phone rang, and I no longer constantly wondered if I was doing something wrong. "Leah," I said, "do you think I'm selfish?" "Selfish for what?" "For leaving a marriage and choosing to live for yourself." Leah looked at me for a long time, then spoke slowly. "If you didn't choose yourself, who would you be living for? A man who didn't protect you? A family that saw you as a walking wallet? I just see a woman who finally learned to love herself." I said nothing more, but her words stayed with me for a long time. My divorce from Mark was finalized a few months later. No drama, no drawn-out legal battles. I received the assets I was entitled to, no more, no less. Mark didn't try to hold on. Perhaps, in the end, he also understood there was nothing left between us to save. On the day of the final hearing, I saw my former mother-in-law. She looked at me, her eyes no longer sharp, just tired. She spoke more softly than I had ever heard her. "You were once my daughter-in-law, after all." I nodded politely. "I know. I hope you take care of your health." That was it. No blame, no justifications. For some relationships, ending in silence is the kindest way. As for Mark, I later heard he was doing well. He had a new family, a child. I didn't follow his life, nor was I curious. Everything related to him was placed where it belonged, in the past. Not hated, not missed, just no longer part of my present. A year after the divorce, I saved enough money to make a down payment on a small plot of land near my parents' house. It wasn't big, but it was enough to one day build a small, one-story house with a porch and a garden, where my mother could grow vegetables and my father could raise fish. Holding the deed in my hand, my eyes stung with tears. I used to think that having a home with a husband was the only way to be settled. Now I understood that being settled is when your own heart has a place to stand. My mother was both happy and worried when she heard the news. "Are you sure, son? What if you get married again?" I took her hand and said gently, "If I get married, that person will be stepping into my already stable life, not the other way around, where I have to carry the weight for someone else." My mother fell silent, then nodded. I knew she understood. Some afternoons, I would walk around the village. Children would call out to me, and my heart would soften. I was no longer afraid of the stigma of being a divorced woman. I no longer defined myself by my marital status. I was me, a grown woman with a past and with wounds, but also with a future and the right to choose. One time, I saw Mark at a mutual friend's wedding. He nodded a greeting. I smiled back. No awkwardness, no confusion. Leah, who was standing next to me, whispered, "You see, when you have nothing left to prove, you become naturally calm." I nodded. It was true. That night, I went home and sat at my desk, opening my old journal. I reread the messy scrawls I had written during my most desperate days. Some pages were stained with tears, others filled with unanswered questions. I turned to the last page, picked up a pen, and added one final line. I finally stopped living to be loved and started living to be worthy of myself. I closed the journal and put it away in a drawer. I knew I didn't need to write about the pain anymore. It had served its purpose in my life. Outside, the moon was high in the sky. My mother's voice called me inside for some ginger tea. My father was watching the news. Seeing me, he asked, "Was work tiring today?" "It was okay, Dad." My mother placed the cup in front of me and said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, "If you're tired, then rest. We have more than enough food in this house." I held the cup, the warmth spreading through my fingertips and into my heart. I suddenly understood that happiness wasn't about having a man by my side, but about having a place where I could be myself without trying to be someone else. I sat there, between my parents, in our old house, listening to the wind rustle through the garden. In that moment, I felt a strange and profound peace. I didn't need any promises, nor did I need a dazzling future painted for me. I just needed to know that when I woke up tomorrow, I would still be me, unafraid, unbowed. My story didn't end with a new marriage, nor with revenge or triumph. It ended with tranquility, with my learning to put myself in my rightful place. It ended with my understanding that some farewells are not a loss, but a kind of homecoming. A return to oneself.